What would you do if someone pointed a loaded gun at your 10-year-old child just because their lawn wasn't up to neighborhood standards? This is the shocking true story of a Navy SEAL father whose world was ripped apart over something as trivial as grass length. Imagine moving to a quiet neighborhood, thinking you're finally safe, only for your child to be targeted for something as small as their wheelchair ramp. What happens next is a nightmare no one should ever face. Before we dive into this unbelievable story, comment below where you're watching from. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more unbelievable stories like this one. In today's video, you'll hear how a seemingly normal neighborhood dispute escalated into tragedy. What started as a complaint about lawn length led to something unimaginable, forever changing the lives of a Navy SEAL family. Stay tuned to hear how it all unfolded and the fight for justice that followed. Meet Marcus, a seasoned Navy SEAL, a father who spent his life on the front lines protecting others. He's faced dangers no one can imagine, from high-stakes combat missions to hostage situations. But no amount of training could ever prepare him for the horror that was about to unfold in his own neighborhood. Marcus had just moved his family to Maplewood Estates, a quiet, suburban neighborhood that seemed like the perfect place to settle down. For years, he'd been deployed on covert missions, but now he was home, ready to enjoy some peace and quiet with his wife, Rebecca, and their son, Jake. Jake, a 10-year-old boy, had cerebral palsy. He couldn't walk without his wheelchair and relied on a ramp at the front of their house to navigate the world. Despite the challenges, Jake had a personality that could light up any room. He loved comic books, video games, and anything that allowed him to create his own little world. Marcus had big dreams for his family, a safe home where they could finally experience what it was like to just live, without the constant threats of the outside world. But little did he know, this peaceful neighborhood would soon show its cracks, and one neighbor in particular would make his family the target of relentless harassment. It started small, just little things here and there. The kind of neighborhood complaints that were easy to ignore at first. The Mitchells had barely settled in when the first notice arrived from the HOA, led by Patricia Holloway, a woman known for enforcing the rules of the neighborhood with an iron fist. She seemed to take issue with anything that didn't fit her ideal version of what a perfect neighborhood should look like. At first, it was the ramp, a slight violation of some obscure HOA regulation. Then it was their trash cans left out a few minutes longer than allowed. But Patricia's complaints didn't stop there. She seemed to have a personal obsession with the Mitchells, always picking at them over minor, meaningless things that most neighbors wouldn't even notice, let alone care about. Patricia Holloway wasn't just any HOA president. No, she had a reputation. She was known as the neighborhood enforcer, the woman who would make sure every lawn was trimmed to perfection and every fence painted exactly the right shade of white. But behind the polished facade of a good neighbor lay a woman with a darker side, someone who believed her. Self-appointed power over the neighborhood gave her the right to decide who belonged and who didn't. Patricia's obsession with the Mitchell family started to spiral out of control. It wasn't just about the ramp anymore. It was about who they were, what they represented. The Mitchells to her were outsiders who didn't fit her idea of the perfect community. And what started as minor complaints would soon escalate into something far more dangerous, something that would change the Mitchells' lives forever. The first direct confrontation came when Patricia decided that the Mitchells' lawn was too long. A small infraction, barely noticeable, but to Patricia, it was a violation that needed to be addressed immediately. When she found Jake outside, playing with his toy cars, she took it upon herself to correct the situation. Jake, who had been quietly enjoying his toys, was suddenly the target of Patricia's anger. She approached him, demanding to know where his mother was, questioning why he wasn't following her rules. Jake, shy and unable to communicate quickly due to his condition, simply pointed toward the house. But that wasn't good enough for Patricia. She wouldn't let him go. She stepped into his path, blocking him from reaching his mother, and raised her voice. Patricia's voice grew louder, more demanding. She started to criticize Jake for not responding, for ignoring her. Jake, frightened and overwhelmed, tried to wheel away, but Patricia wouldn't let him. It was then that Rebecca, hearing her son's cries, rushed outside. Rebecca confronted Patricia, but what followed was something that no mother should ever have to face. Patricia's anger, which had simmered for months, finally erupted into something much darker. And that was just the beginning. What happened next would set off a chain of events that would change everything for this family. But that wasn't the worst part. What happened next would push everything into a whole new level of danger. A small confrontation was about to escalate into a nightmare that no one could have predicted. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into the Mitchells' fight for survival. What began as a simple dispute over lawn length quickly escalated into something far more dangerous. Patricia Holloway had already made it clear she wasn't going to stop with her complaints. The first red flag came when she made her way over to the Mitchells' yard, armed with nothing but a measuring tape and her usual sense of entitlement. But it wasn't just the lawn that set her off. No, Patricia was about to make her worst decision yet, and it would involve something that would forever change the lives of the Mitchell family. The sun was high in the sky that morning, and the world seemed peaceful, too peaceful. Jake was outside, as he often was, playing with his toy cars on the sidewalk. His wheelchair, a constant companion, sat next to him as he arranged his cars in neat lines, lost in his world of imagination. The faint sound of birds chirping filled the air, but in an instant it would be replaced with something far more menacing. Patricia, determined to enforce her idea of proper neighborhood conduct, had already crossed a line with the Mitchells, but today, that line would be crossed in a way that no one could have anticipated. Patricia's sharp voice pierced the calm, demanding Jake's attention. She was agitated, no, furious. Her hand was outstretched, pointing at the ramp, then back to Jake, as if he was the problem. He was just a kid sitting quietly and minding his own business. But to Patricia, that wasn't enough. Nothing they did was enough. Sarah, who had been inside making lunch, could hear the rise in Patricia's voice and immediately knew something wasn't right. Her heart sank as she stepped outside and saw Jake's small frame trembling in his wheelchair, a mixture of confusion and fear in his eyes. It was the first time Sarah realized that the neighborhood she had once thought was safe, welcoming, friendly, had slowly become a place of tension, hostility, and now, terror. What was once their haven was now an environment of constant judgment, cruelty, and worst of all, danger. Sarah's stomach twisted. Anger, fear, disbelief all swirled together as she stood there, watching her son, who couldn't even walk, be harassed by an angry neighbor over something as trivial as grass length. She had dealt with missions, hostile environments, and life-or-death situations in her career, but none of that had prepared her for the helplessness she felt in that moment. She wanted to protect her son, to shield him from this world that seemed to grow colder by the minute. But how could she protect him from someone who had the audacity to target him for something beyond his control? Everything changed when Patricia, in a fit of rage, crossed a line that no one could have predicted. In the blink of an eye, she reached into her jacket pocket, pulling out something no one ever expected, a loaded gun. Without hesitation, she pointed it directly at Jake, her eyes wild with anger. He was just a child sitting in his wheelchair, surrounded by his toy cars, but to Patricia, that was enough to turn him into a threat. Sarah couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The world around her seemed to slow down as she watched the weapon aimed at her son. This wasn't just a heated argument anymore. This was life or death. Rebecca, who had just come running outside, screamed, trying to intervene to protect Jake. But Patricia's expression remained cold, calculating, as she held the gun steady, refusing to back down. In that moment, everything Sarah had known to be right and safe was shattered. Rebecca, in a desperate attempt to save her son, lunged forward, positioning herself between Patricia and Jake. The gunshot rang out, echoing in Sarah's ears. The first shot hit Jake in the chest, and the second, in a chaotic blur, struck Rebecca in the leg as she threw herself over her son, trying to shield him. The world spun out of control. Neighbors came running, but it was too late. By the time 911 was called, by the time the police arrived, it was all over. Jake, Sarah's sweet, innocent son, was gone. He died in Rebecca's arms, his small body crushed beneath the weight of something that should never have happened. All of this over a lawn, a few inches of grass, and a neighbor's unrelenting bitterness. But what happened after that would shock everyone, even those who thought they had seen it all. The police arrived, but would they be able to stop the damage that had already been done? The legal battle, the fight for justice, would soon become just as intense as the fight for survival. But how could the law possibly rectify something so horrific? The case was just beginning, and what lay ahead would push the Mitchell family to their breaking point. Would the law protect them, or would they be forced to take matters into their own hands? Stay tuned, as the Mitchells prepare for their ultimate battle, the fight for justice. Sarah rushed home, her mind racing with panic, praying it was all just a horrible mistake. But when she got to the house, the nightmare she feared was already real. Her son Jake, her sweet, innocent boy, was gone. His toy cars lay scattered across the front lawn, a cruel reminder of the life he would never finish living. Red car, blue car, yellow car, green car, lined up perfectly, just the way Jake always did. But there was no Jake to finish the race. Sarah's heart shattered. Her mind refused to accept the truth, but it was all around her. Rebecca, her wife, trembling in shock and pain, unable to process the horror they had just lived through. But Sarah couldn't let herself break down, not yet. She had to be strong. But her rage was boiling over. How could someone do this to her son? To her family? A neighbor, someone they had never considered a threat, had taken everything from them. Over a lawn, a few inches of grass. Patricia Holloway was arrested, but Sarah knew that the battle was far from over. Patricia had taken her son's life. The weight of that reality sat heavy on Sarah's chest as she prepared for the legal fight ahead. Justice had to be served. Sarah would make sure of that. But the legal system, as Sarah quickly learned, wasn't as straightforward as she had hoped. Patricia's lawyer was a seasoned professional, someone who had defended high-profile clients before. And if there was one thing Sarah knew, it was that Patricia's legal team would fight tooth and nail to twist the narrative in their favor. Would the truth prevail? Or would the system fail them just like it had failed Jake? The trial was a long and emotionally charged affair. Sarah took the stand, her voice trembling as she recounted the heartbreaking details of her son's life. The boy who had been full of joy, despite his disability. The boy who had never once shown hate, only love. She spoke about his favorite things, comic books, video games, and the way he would light up when his father, a Navy SEAL, came home. Sarah spoke of the love they had shared as a family and how in the blink of an eye it was all ripped away. But Patricia's lawyer wasn't going to let the truth shine through without a fight. The defense tried to paint Patricia as the victim. They claimed she was simply trying to protect her neighborhood, that her actions had been out of fear. Fear of a disabled child? A child who could barely walk without assistance and loved nothing more than playing with his toy cars? The defense's attempts to manipulate the courtroom were transparent, but they still held weight. They were twisting facts, feeding the jury a narrative that didn't match the reality of what had happened. They were trying to make the story about Patricia's fear, not the murder of an innocent child. After hours of deliberation, the courtroom held its breath as the jury returned with their decision. Would Patricia be held accountable for her actions? Would justice be served for Jake? Sarah sat in silence, her heart pounding in her chest, hoping the verdict would bring some kind of closure, but nothing would bring Jake back. The jury found Patricia guilty on all charges: assault with a deadly weapon, reckless endangerment of a child, and civil rights violations. Sarah sat in stunned silence as the words rang in her ears. She had won. Justice had been served. But in that moment, she felt a hollow victory. The man who had pulled the trigger, the woman who had taken her son's life, was being held accountable. But it would never be enough to undo the pain they felt, the loss of their child, the years they would never get back, the smiles, the laughter, the future they'd never share. Sarah stared down at her hands, trying to reconcile the relief of the verdict with the empty space Jake had left behind. She had fought for justice, but at what cost? What had it really given them? Their family was forever broken. And while Patricia would face the consequences of her actions, it didn't change the harsh reality that Jake was gone forever. The fight for justice didn't end in that courtroom. It wasn't just about this one case. It was about every child who deserved to live without fear, without hatred, and without the weight of judgment for something they could never control. The system had worked this time. But will it always? Will it always be enough to protect the vulnerable? Or will we have to fight for justice ourselves? The Mitchells' fight was over. But the battle for fairness, for equality, and for the right to live free from hate, it's a fight that will never truly end.